What does it mean to be a man in today's evolving world? How do we as men not only step up as men in this world, but transform the definition of masculinity itself? To be the lovers, the heroes, and the role models that the world so desperately craves. How do we begin to recreate our connection to manhood? This is that movement. We are ushering in a new generation of men and a new definition of masculine power to radically transform your sex life, your love life, your work life, and your world. I am Destin Garrick, and this is The Evolved Masculine, redefining sex, power, and success. Welcome, everyone. So, last night I got to be at a close friend of mine, Just Magic, aka Jess Johnson, did a song release rooftop gathering for this new song, Unify, that she's putting out on Inauguration Day. And I gotta say, it really touched me. I mean, Jess is incredible in her ability to... Her music's so evocative, you know that music that you listen to that just stirs your heartstrings and can even bring a tear to your eye? Yeah, that's generally most of her music, if not all of it. So, it really touched something in me, primarily around just how divided we are. I think we're all pretty aware of that at this point, particularly over the past few months with the past year with the election, then ultimately with Election Day and the aftermath. And I know that I spent Election Day on a ship at sea, something called Summit at Sea, with 3,000 heavy hitters in all sorts of industries, with presentations and panel discussions from people like will.i.am, David Data, I can't even recall right now. There were a bunch of Olympian gold medalists and Dolores Huerta and social activists and God, when you come on, Tiq, I'm gonna have to get your help here. But the who's who list was really rather impressive, but it in many ways, I kept thinking while I was on there that when Trump rails against the progressive elite, that's kind of who I was with during Election Day, and it was really a trip being amongst this opulence, really, during this time when it felt like the world was falling apart, or at least we were stepping into an entirely new chapter of our nation's history, and leading up to that day, I was feeling so increasingly anxious, such that Election Day itself, I honestly think I felt more anxiety that day than I can ever recall. But somewhere around 11:30 at night, when it just suddenly became clear, oh shit, like, Trump's won. That anxiety, which if you hadn't figured, was not my hoped for outcome. The moment that was clear, something in me immediately shifted. That anxiety went away in an instant and was replaced by optimistic determination. As if something in me got catalyzed at an even deeper level of any place that I may have been holding myself back, not being fully in my gifts, not giving my everything that I've got to help have the impact on this world that I believe that I'm here to have. That can't be anymore. It's like if there's a line in the sand, it has been crossed, and we, those who care, have to say no more. It stops here. We cannot allow this. And by this, I don't just mean Trump. It's more of the various ideologies and things that were put forward through his campaign and what he seems to represent in many people's minds. I know that not everybody listening to this necessarily agrees with me on this politically, but I invite you to listen with an open mind, as I would hopefully do the same with you. But that's kind of my point, is that also in the time since, I've been really in that deep inquiry around what do we do about this. My spiritual belief system, which runs everything that I do, is rooted in unity. It's rooted in oneness consciousness. It's rooted in there is no separation between you and I. There's no separation between you, I, and God itself, the universe. We are the all. The all is us. And so with that belief system, then, like, how do we handle the fact that we're so fucking divided, that we seem to just see one another, these different sides, and not only are you different than me, you are my enemy. And what do we do with that? How do we come together when our perspectives are so radically different? Our belief systems can end up have such core root differences. So I came out of this got further sparked listening to her just sing last night with the chorus line around Unify, and I don't know. I have this desire now to the people that I generally have on my show. I largely hold a rather similar worldview with. We may have certain slight differences, but we're overlapping pieces on the same team, so to speak, building this, with the intent on building the same kind of world. And it's wonderful, don't get me wrong, and I love introducing people who I feel this way about. At the same time, I just felt really inspired last night to start to ask the question of, who could I bring onto the show who I think radically differently with? Radically differently from, sorry. And that's not my guest today. But I'm asking you, I suppose, my listeners, like, who would you like to see me bring on the show who you think, who has an interest in these same types of topics, around male-female dynamics, around masculinity, around being a man in the world today, around what's going on between men and women today, around a sense of purpose and creating this world, but who sees it all very differently than myself, maybe even diametrically opposed to myself. Because if I can't have that conversation and can't have that, I'm not interested in getting into a screaming match. Not at all, actually. There's way too much of that going on as it is. But where can we explore? Even explore those differences, and even if we ultimately maintain our sense of strong disagreements, I guess my desire is that through the conversation have a deeper understanding of one another, as well as our respective listening audiences come to a deeper understanding of one another, and the fact that civil exchanges can occur, maybe even common ground can be found. I don't know if I'm asking for too much, but if there's somebody that comes to your mind, please send me an email, destin@evolvedmasculine.com, DESTIN@evolvedmasculine.com, and if you have a connection to the person, even better, make an introduction. So, with that, I met our next guest on that ship at Summit at Sea, and I met him because I saw a presentation labeled #Masculinity So Fragile. Well, of course, that was a panel that I would need to be at, and I make my way in, and it's in this large auditorium space, but there are a bunch of pillows and cushions kind of laid out on the stage. Entirely different layout than any of the other presentations. I'm like, all right. So I make my way onto the stage and I sit down, and it turns out that this panel is being run. It's more of a discussion being run by 3 individuals. A trans man, female to male trans man, who, a queer identified man, and a kind of butch presenting woman. Now, who's also a co-founder of the Toronto Black Lives Matter movement. So this is, I've done a lot of things around masculinity for quite a long time, and having a panel on masculinity run by a set of individuals all coming from these particular life path was new for me, which for myself, I love that. I'm honestly tired of hearing the same thing all the time. And lo and behold, I got to hear new perspectives that some of which challenged my way of thinking. I was particularly impressed by one particular line by Tiq Milan, my guest who I'm introducing now. And that was when he said, again, Tiq was the trans man. He said, "I am a man because I say so." And I may be butchering the quote, but the point being that struck me around that is I work with men all the time, and I explore this whole thing around what it means to be a man in the 21st century, day in, day out. It gets a tremendous amount of my energy, and God, the number of men that I've met in my life who just struggle with the concept of being a man and what does it mean, and all the things that men have done throughout history trying to prove to themselves and to the world that they're a man. And here is this person who, according to much of the world, was wouldn't have been a man. According to his doctors at birth, certainly wasn't given that label. Who simply proclaims in a place of, I could feel his pure solidity in himself as he said it, "I am a man because I say so." Done. That is powerful. And with that, I welcome Tiq Milan.
Oh, thank you so much for that introduction. That was awesome. I'm happy to join you today.
So, Tiq, tell us a little bit about you. How'd you get here?
How did I get here? Well, a little bit about me. I am trans. I'm transgender, female to male. I started my transition in my 20s. I'm in my mid 30s now. So I've been, in the world as a man for the last 10 years, and prior to that, I was very masculine identified for a while and androgynous and occupied that space. And then prior to that, I was very feminine presenting, throughout high school, and doing adolescence, for various reasons. So I've been in the world in various spaces and have had various experiences. And I think all of those things have culminated into the man that I am today, on that level. All of those things have influenced how my masculinity presents itself in the world. It's heavily influenced how I'm designing my own masculinity, because that's what I think about it as. I think of being a transgender person and being a masculine person as being a person of self-determination, and being able to say that, I am because I say I am. And I'm going to work this hard. And I'm going to make these sacrifices to be exactly the person that I want to be in the world. And I'm going to live in it and perform in it and act in it in the way that I choose. So as far as how I've came here as a man and as a masculine.
I'm going to pause you right there just to
Sure.
let that all land, because you've already said a lot. Put bluntly, most people today don't understand transgenderism at all. We have greater understanding now than we've had in this country, and it's barely beginning.
Right.
And
that's true.
And this is why voices like yours is so important, especially your way of being able to speak about these things. The way that you just described it as the trans identity as self-determination, that's wow. I had never really thought of it in those terms. Especially, again, as I said, I hear, I'm in these conversations with men particularly all the time, and particularly this journey of deeper personal empowerment. And ultimately, that's what we all want, isn't it? To feel a sense of real self-determination in this world, in this culture that doesn't really support that.
Yeah, and I think with men, men, masculine folks, cisgender men particularly. Let me explain what cisgender is.
Great.
So cisgender, cis is the Latin word for same, right? And so cisgender basically means a person who was assigned, a gender at birth, and they grow up and they identify as that gender that they were assigned at birth. So you are cisgender. Right,
Sure.
that's your cisgender, right? Most people are cisgender. I'm transgender. And another thing I wanted to come back to was you said transgenderism, right? Which is an incorrect term and something I don't like when these comes up because it can be a teachable moment for you and for the audience.
I
all these things.
appreciate it.
Because it's not an ism. You know what I'm saying? It's not like it's not like this thing that has come up in modernity. It's not like. It doesn't function in that way, but in order for us to understand like what it means to be transgender is for us to start to expand what we know gender to be, right? Gender isn't this binary system of just masculinity and femininity, these two very static points. It's not just male and female. There are so many points in between, and it's because within this age that we live in here in 2016, we have the term transgender. Transgender is just like the process of coming into who you are. But, if we already had a scope of gender and a spectrum of gender, then there will be a name for the man that I am in the body that I am in. You know what I'm saying? Because we exist. We've existed for thousands of years.
Yeah, I
there
know
are
that's
cultures where there are names for people who have a third or a fourth gender. You know what I'm saying? So we're here. So I think the issue with that is understanding trans people within this very binary spectrum, which doesn't leave a lot of room for trans people who present their masculinity or their femininity in many different ways, right? So, I think it's important, for folks to take a step back and start understanding that gender is a spectrum of possibility and that masculinity belongs to the person who embodies it.
So, so much here. so what came up for me as I was listening to you is like I've had my own interesting, oftentimes challenging journey around my own gender identity and expression in the world. And I express more masculine at this point in my life than at any other point in my life previously. I've been increasingly moving in the direction of, I think of it as embodying more and more of my masculine. When I was younger, and I speak about this on my show fairly regularly as well as in other parts, that due to a series of different, some of them traumatic incidents, I took on the message at a fairly young age that masculinity wasn't safe. Yeah. And so with that, I shut down, denied, and repressed a lot of my own masculinity and kind of retreated into my feminine more and embraced my feminine more. And there are aspects of it that were a total gift. I have access to all the, so much of the beautiful, powerful aspects of the feminine. Are you there? Hello?
Yeah, hello.
Okay,
I don't know what happened. Yeah. Okay.
Edit. That I have access to my softness. I have access to my receptivity. I have access to my compassion, my empathy, my free flow, my attention to the subtle body and my emotions and aesthetics, all these things that are traditionally feminine qualities that I love about me. I really do. I absolutely love about me. Yeah. However, when I went down that path, it wasn't, I believed, and I came to believe, partly because I was immersed through a good chunk of that time in college and the time after in a lot of like feminist and queer circles who really supported me in being this way, in embracing myself as a feminine man. Yeah. And initially it felt good and it seemed like a good thing. But as time went on, I started to sense that something wasn't entirely right here.
Right.
Ultimately realizing that it's not that, oh, I just am this way. It's I am being this way as a result of unhealed wounds.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went through massive intentional healing around my relationship to my own masculinity, as well as my relationship to men, because I had no men in my life during that time period. Because honestly,
Yeah.
while I wouldn't have said it, I was afraid of men.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so as I went through those changes, those healings, I started diving into exploring. Okay, if I get to choose my masculinity, if I get to explore from this place of adulthood, no longer a frightened child, essentially, what would that look like? And determine if for myself that yes, much of our larger culture's ideas around masculinity are fucking toxic, are
Yeah.
broken. But is that inherently what the masculine is? And finally realizing no, there's much more there. And
Yeah.
through that, determining that I was going to be a representation of the healthy masculine in the world.
Yeah.
And so that's a brief journey through, brief story of my journey through these dynamics. And I'm curious, like, how that relates is different from your own experience or perspective.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think see. Here's the thing. I think like when you're saying to come into this place where you start to embrace your softness and embrace your compassion, that is happening at the same time while you may be presenting more feminine or performing more feminine, but softness and compassion isn't necessarily all feminine. Like softness, that's the thing. We have to really start to expand what it means to be masculine, right? And sometimes masculinity can be soft and masculinity is compassion. Those things can occupy the same spaces at the same time, So, listening to you, that's the one thing that came up for me is like thinking about this idea of softness, of compassion, of, nurturing, of even like a lightness, to who you are, or even like a lightness in your step, as something that is inherently feminine, when feminine doesn't have to necessarily look like that. When femininity is also very strong too, right? Mm. And it's like, I'll always see how there's a lot of space for femininity to look different, even though it's criticized in a very particular way. But the limitations that are placed on masculinity are just so rigid. And it's just so toxic that we're not even allowing like these different types of emotions and different types of experience that we just have as human beings, to be a part of our masculine identity. Also what came up for me is you explaining in a way how your embracing of your feminine side and of your femininity came as a result of you being afraid of men and of masculinity through, the experiences that you've had, which I think is important, and I'm sorry that you had those experiences. I think that's important. And what is also important is to know that, and I think that is kind of like a queerness, when male identified men, when, men who are identified as men are feminine or perform femininity, I think there's a queerness there, right? And I think later on we'll probably talk more about what queer is. But I think it's a slippery slope when sometimes it gets couched around this thing that queerness is always a reaction to something that's traumatic. Because queerness does come up that way, but it's also important to know that it also happens in a very organic way. Like, I'm queer. You know what I'm saying? So, I think I just wanted to bring that into the space, but like, like you've had a queer experience in the world, you know what I'm saying?
I'm sure that's probably accurate.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Say that again?
I said I'm sure that's probably accurate.
Yeah, like you totally had a queer experience in the world, and I think too often masculine men are allowed to have that experience and still be able to claim their space of their masculinity, which is just fucked up. You know what I'm saying? Because gender is fluid, and how gender is performed is fluid. And at one point in your life, embracing this femininity or walking in your femininity in a particular way was good for you, and now it's not, and that is okay. Yeah. Like we have to make space for people to go with the fluidity of their gender as it is. Some people are more fluid than others, but you know what I'm saying? Like we just have to make more space for people to be who they are.
So this is a place where I'm very appreciative of being able to have this conversation with you, because in many ways I feel like I was deeply immersed in this conversation from this set of paradigms that I believe that you're largely immersed in, and then it's like at a certain point I stepped into a different paradigm, and I've been working and functioning primarily from that paradigm. And now it's like, okay, through this conversation I'm hoping that I can explore where and how do those two connect, where do they integrate, where don't they. What comes up with for me whenever I hear the sense of people being who they are, on one hand, I'm a yes,
Right.
a huge yes, that we have so many forces upon us in our society of this is how you're supposed to be, and
Right.
in fact, even more than that, it's more like here is a particular feminine ideal, here is a particular masculine ideal. You're never going to be it, but you are supposed to spend your entire life spending a fortune as well as time and energy trying your best to live up to this ideal that you're never going to be, and you're never going to be enough. You're never going to be man enough. You're never going to be woman enough. So feel ashamed, feel not enough, and buy our products to try to get a little bit closer.
Right. And it's like who's enough? Like, who set the standard of what of who is enough of a man or who is enough of a woman? It's like we have to divest from that type of thinking, and that's why for me it's so important for me that I identify as queer. Even though I'm a masculine man who is attracted to, and I'm married to a feminine woman, right?
Beautiful woman, very beautiful.
Thank you, thank you so much. Yeah. She's super hot, love her. And people look at us as a heterosexual couple, but we are so far from a heterosexual couple. You know what I'm saying? There's there's a queerness in our culture, that we live by. You know what I'm saying? There's as queer people who have always been out, who's our relationship as a married couple was, the people that we are has always been outside of these systems. You know what I'm saying? Whether it's been the church, whether it's been the state, whether it's been the education, whether it's been criminalized for being people of color, for being queer, for being too femme. Because of those things, we've been able to kind of divest from certain standards in many ways and kind of create our own, And that's why when I think of queerness and the idea of queerness and self-determination queerness is also liberation, I think queer culture is something that can be liberating for like cisgender and heterosexual people.
No, say more on that. What do you mean by that?
I mean, I think often when we talk about queer people, when we talk about trans people, we get caught at this space of talking about the struggles that we've been through and the resilience that we have to get through it, right? Mm-hmm. And not talking about like all of the beautiful things that are happening within queer culture. Like, I know so many different types of masculine people. I know so many different types of feminine people all across the gender spectrum in all kinds of bodies, he, she, and they, and Z pronouns, people who are finding love with like-minded people just like them. You know what I'm saying? People who are having sex exactly the way they want to, no matter how taboo or how nasty it is. It's consensual and it's adults, right? You know what I'm saying? I know so many people like that within this culture because, we've kind of, in many ways, it's not about us recreating heterosexual relationships, but us, determining what healthy relationships are for us, whether they are two masculine people together, two feminine people, masculine and feminine, or people who are outside of that spectrum. You know what I'm saying? We are creating these here, and creating that and creating it in a healthy way means we are allowing people to be in their bodies and be in their genders the way they want to be. Right. And I think that this is something that heterosexual and cisgender people can do too. Let me tell you, so for instance, one of my best friends, she's a straight woman, but she's kind of masculine. And because of that, it's hard for her to date. Like she'll get with guys who will be with her, but not like be with her out in the open, who will really like her in a particular way. But because it's like taboo for a masculine cisgender man to date and to love a masculine presenting cisgender woman, it's hard for her to find people to love her as she is. Whereas in queer culture, that's nothing. That's those kind of relationships happen. We celebrate these different relationships. We want to see these things. So that's why I think that like queer liberation is something that can work for all people.
Okay, so there that level of freedom is really beautiful, and that's a place where we definitely connect in our perspectives. This desire for people to be free, to love as they want to love, to have the life experience they want to have.
Yeah,
there's something that happens in my world that I think is a little different than what's going on in your world that I'm interested in exploring with you, because my listeners are largely in my world, and that's men and women identified who are basically feeling a little screwed up from this culture that we've been in, and these shifts that have been going on over the past couple of generations, and are trying to refine their connection to, like men who are trying to refine their connection to their masculine, and women who are trying to refine their connection to their feminine. Like, for example, women in the corporate world who learn to put on a masculine mask, is how it's sometimes thought of or seen, in order to survive or thrive or win in this man's world. And they have done, there are those who have done so, but then at a cost, a feeling of there's something in me, like I don't even know how to connect to the her in me, the feminine in me.
Right.
And likewise, a lot of the men who find their way to me are men who, often not as extreme as my version, but who feel like they have a hard time connecting to their masculine, who have gotten the message that the masculine is bad, is toxic, is they don't want to be that guy, and for fear of being that guy, they've suppressed parts of themselves.
Yes.
How does that weave in with your perspective?
Here's the thing. Masculinity is toxic. It is. It absolutely is. And to say I don't want to be that guy is to not be accountable for the toxicity that masculinity is causing all over this planet. Like, femicide is real. Sexual assault and rape and this rape culture that we live in is real. People are quick. People are more quick to abandon a gay family member than they are to call out the uncle who's molesting little kids in their families. You know what I'm saying? There is a problem with masculinity.
Okay.
There's a problem with
that. I'll agree with. Like, I'll absolutely agree with. There is a problem with masculinity in the world today. A huge fucking problem. And I'll also agree that the largest expression of masculinity in the world today is tainted, is toxic, so to speak. However, where I get a little triggered as you say that is, I do not at all believe that masculinity is inherently toxic. I believe we're living in a time period in which it is largely toxic, because of what's gone on over the past couple thousand years. I believe that the ways in which the feminine has been repressed and suppressed and controlled and dominated over that time has created such an imbalance that has not only affected her, but him as well, has fucked up everybody.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that masculinity is inherently toxic either. But the way in which masculinity is in the world, the way that it's performed, the way that's inherited, and influences that it has, is killing people.
Yeah.
And we can't move forward until we start to be accountable for that. Every last one of us, the trans guys, the cis guys, the gentle ones, the brutes, like all of us have to be accountable for what masculinity is doing to this planet, is doing to us. You know what I'm saying? So we have to start there. So yeah, it's not inherently toxic, but we just can't throw that out the window and start to do all of this self-reflection if we're not thinking about like us as men, the privileges that we have in this world, the patriarchy we live in, the rape culture that we live in, that we are benefiting from every single day, how we're taking part in that every single day. So we have to start to hold each other accountable before anything else.
Okay, so
somebody has to be responsible for the toxic masculine in this world, and we can't keep looking at other people.
So what does it mean to take responsibility for and to be accountable for? It's something that you hear too much in the world or on social media is, dude, this yeah, it's not my fault. I didn't do anything.
Yeah. Exactly. I could say the same thing. I've never hurt anybody. I've never done anything, but you know what I'm saying? But we still benefit from the culture that we live in. So I think accountability looks like a lot of self-reflection. It looks like really thinking about like the inherited, the biases that we have and the sexism and the misogyny that we have deep inside of us. It's really about going deep and understanding where these things come from and how they manifest in the world. It's about having conversations with women and the feminine folks in your life about their relationship to masculinity and the men in their world. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I've had too many conversations with men, particularly when we're talking about like violence, interpartner violence or sexual assault or things like that. So I do a lot of that. I talk about that often. And they're so quick to say, well, not in my family. But it's like, well, who did you talk to? Did you ask your mom? Did you ask any one of your aunties? Did you ask a sister? Because I bet you one of them or all of them have stories. I'm telling you right now, 90% of the women I know have experienced some kind of violence at the hands of men. And so we're looking at interpartner violence, individual violence, but what about the things that happen on a social level, happen on an institutional level? You know what I'm saying? These are things that we have to start to interrogate, or we're going to just keep chasing our tails. And, as a trans guy, I've come into my masculinity in a different way. I wasn't born into this manhood. I've had to curate my manhood. And a part of that curation has to come in interrogation. It has been interrogating like this cohort, this fraternity of masculine people assume that I'm cisgender type of man, right? Understanding what kind of man I'm going to be in the world, understanding what it means to be a man in the world, looking at what being a man in the world has done to people who aren't men, and asking myself am I going to be a part of that or am I not? And it's not easy. It feels shitty. Even though I'm trans and I try to go to this place where I'm a trans guy, so I'm more sophisticated than that, or I'm not violent like that, or I don't hate women. Just by me being masculine in the world, I have an obligation to interrogate how these things show up, whether it's a little, whether it's a lot, whether it's subtle. And too many men aren't ready to do that. They just want to jump to something else, and no movement is happening until that happens.
What if this was the new normal in your sex life? Hi, I'm Destin, masculine empowerment coach and creator of enticingdesire.com. And I'm here to tell you that yes, all of this is possible and more. Learn to become the lover that women remember, the one that she brags about to her friends. Head on over to enticingdesire.com to claim your free 24-minute introductory training to becoming the best lover she's ever had. I have 19 years of education, training, and experience in the field of sexuality, and I can tell you that I have seen complete transformations in men from the application of the simple principles presented in this video. Increases in confidence, performance, and satisfaction. With no pills required, no tricks, no gimmicks. This is an introduction to an entirely new way of being that will spark her authentic craving for you and your body. Head on over to enticingdesire.com now and evolve your sexual consciousness. So you mentioned earlier that you essentially have had three main phases around your gender identity and expression.
Yeah.
When you were young, where it was more you were feminine presenting, socially deemed girl, to then being more butch presenting, more masculine presenting, still kind of female identified, and
Yeah.
then transitioning into being identified as a man.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear about your experience of men and women, boys and girls, masculinity, femininity through that progression.
Yeah. Well, I think at the beginning, as a young kid, I never really ascribed to anything that I never liked the things I was supposed to like. You know what I'm saying? As a little kid, I didn't want the girl bike. I wanted the boy bike with the noisemakers. You know what I'm saying? I didn't like Barbie dolls. I liked Transformers. So I had like I always already leaned towards a sort of more boyish kind of childhood. And I was, privileged enough to have parents who were really open. They were just like, whatever this kid wants, as long as they're happy, But what happened was when I started to like hit puberty, and sexuality starts to develop and like life starts to happen as a teenager, I went to an all-girls high school. So because I was at this all-girls high school, I had to really ascribe to really like performing feminine and presenting more feminine than I did as like a little kid, So during that time, I learned a lot about what it felt like to be a feminine young like woman in the world. The vulnerability around that is intense. And just feeling and just seeing how oftentimes I wasn't allowed to be free in my body the way I wanted to, where I would see like young men and young boys the same age as me who were.
What do you mean by that?
I remember like as a little kid, when I was a little kid, I wanted to like, climb trees. I remember my mother had got my hair done, right? Like curls and shit, right? Oh God. And I went outside to play. And I climbed a tree with like the other little boys in my neighborhood. I climbed this pine tree. I climbed all the way to the top of the tree, and I was so proud of myself. And I came home, and I had all these pine needles and sap in my hair. And my mother was livid, like she was just beside herself. And I remember being so hurt because I couldn't understand. Like I'm just doing what I want to do, what feels good in my body, and I don't understand why the kids in the neighborhood that I identify with most with little boys, well, I couldn't do like them, right? I couldn't ride my bike all over the neighborhood. I could only stay on the block. I couldn't stay out after the streetlights passed, went on. I couldn't, run and get dirty the way they did. I was expected to be kind of contained in my body because I was a little girl. And that's something that little girls didn't do. And it was also about keeping me safe from boys. So, from an early age, I just learned through that masculinity and being a boy meant having more freedom. And also at the same time meant being more dangerous. And I remember not really knowing those two things, but not understanding like why those things were happening with these people at the same time and why I couldn't be with them, So I started to understand that at a very early age. I think my life as a feminine person was basically was during high school, and I had a couple boyfriends. I tried it. It was, it didn't work. I tried it. I tried gender and sexuality are two very different things. I know lots of gay trans people, just to put that out there. So I came out as gay at the age of 15. But I was still presenting feminine. One thing I felt for me, being feminine didn't feel comfortable. Just physically, with heels and stockings and tighter pants and tighter blouses. I felt constantly contained, And so I talked to my wife about this. My wife is very feminine. She loves being feminine. She's a femme, like politically, aesthetically, And she's like, yeah, it's not uncomfortable for me because I love it, but it is tight and it is conforming and it takes a lot of time. There's a lot of ritual around it, right? So there's just so much like ritual and care around femininity in a very particular way that I could just never get with, Yeah, so that aesthetic it really didn't work for me. Dating, being vulnerable, having young men think that they can just, speak to you. Like, I remember at 14, I had a boy who was my boyfriend at the time, hold me down, try to rape me, but he didn't, but he tried. I remember going to I played basketball all through high school, and I was an All-American basketball girls basketball star and all this. And I went to Colgate University to go for an overnight visit. And I woke up with, some boy rubbing up on me in my bed. You know what I'm saying? And that was always a weird experience for me because, inside I had a lot of this masculine energy happening. I was presenting very feminine. I had a lot of masculine energy and I really didn't know what to do with it. And I was really just containing it, and I would kind of write about it, but I knew that it was there and it was going to come up later in life. So I had that happening. And at the same time, having to have these types of interactions with masculine people was really fucking with my head. It was really making me, it was very confusing, for me, trying to understand what masculinity was and who I was at the time. So then right after that, so that was my experience as a feminine person. After that, after high school and I was going to college, I decided that femininity was over. And I really started to, I came out as a lesbian at the time. And, my parents had finally, it took a minute, but my parents had finally come around, so I felt comfortable, walking in the world as more of a masculine person. So, I stopped wearing dresses, and little by little, I started to get rid of these feminine things, these feminine articles, these feminine signifiers, slowly just peeling off the layers. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I was peeling off these layers and putting another layer back on, as I moved into my 20s and being in the world as a masculine presenting woman, or even as an androgynous person. People definitely treated me differently. The vulnerability was still there, but it was different. It was still unsafe for me to ride the trains in New York City late at night, as a masculine presenting woman. Because if somebody looked at me too close and clocked me, as they say, I could be putting myself in a dangerous situation. And I've been followed through the trains and, had things happen, when I was in New York City. So that was still there, but I also noticed how men started to react differently towards me. It wasn't so much. It was either they did a bro thing, all of a sudden I became a bro and I became valid enough to be in their company and to have a conversation with them that wasn't sexualized, or this is particularly cisgender heterosexual men, or I would have cis heterosexual guys who were intimidated by the masculinity that I was embodying. It will over-sexualize me, trying to trying to sexualize it out of me, in a very, very particular way.
What does that mean, to sexualize it out of you?
I mean, sexual. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the word. Oftentimes I would meet guys who would see me as a masculine person, and they would go out of their way to call me sweetie, or Miss Lady, or talk about how I would be so pretty if. Or if they had a chance, then this, or you have a really pretty face for a dyke. I used to get these things, trying to almost put me in my place, because I was occupying a place that wasn't desirable for them. I wasn't presenting. They were seeing that I wasn't deliberately deliberately presenting myself for their eyes, for their gaze. And so because of that, they wanted to re-sexualize me in a way to fit them. Right, but I was walking in the world as a female, as a woman who wasn't for them, and sometimes, they were just, wanted to be bros. And then sometimes, they wanted to fix that, make me theirs. You know what I'm saying? So I was having that experience often. And so I really retreated into queer community around that time, because being very masculine, being a masculine presenting woman in the world, and being around lots of, I'm just going to be honest, around cisgender heterosexual men was just unsafe. It was unsafe and it was uncomfortable. So I really found my people, I really found a nice, enclave of gay community in New York City. And that's where I started to develop my masculinity there. Around other butch and masculine women, around masculine gay men, around feminine gay men, just looking at how their manhood develops, and then in my mid-20s, I started to understand that trans men actually existed. I didn't even know that trans men existed. I'd seen trans women, I'd seen drag queens, but I didn't know that happened on the other end of the spectrum until I'd met this trans guy named Nico. He walked into this bar that I was working at to have a fundraiser for his top surgery, which is basically a double mastectomy and chest reconstruction, which is a surgery a lot of trans men get. So he was having a fundraiser for his top surgery, and I met him. He had a full beard, and he had his deep voice. And I was just like, "What? This guy used to be a girl? Like, what the fuck?" Like I'd never seen anything like that before. I was just like fascinated, and I asked him like all the inappropriate questions. Like we don't ask trans people about their genitals. We don't ask trans people about what their names used to be. I asked them all that shit. You know what I'm saying? I was just
no wonder why you're patient with me.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Because somebody had to be patient with me, you know what I'm saying? It's all learning experience. And he really, he put me on, he let me know, what it meant to be trans. And then, long story short, I found an online community of other trans men. I started to make my medical and my legal transition. I slowly came out to my family. That was a process. And then, came, and now that I'm here, as a man in the world who, people people never know that I'm trans, and live in a particular way. I've come out of like lesbian community completely, really, because as a man, I don't feel like I should occupy these spaces, these all female spaces, and these all female spaces are for women to feel safe and to feel empowered, and I don't really feel like I should be there. So I'm not really in queer community like in that way anymore. So now I'm here, trying to figure out what it means to be a man and figuring out what it means to be masculine in the world. You know what I'm saying? Trying to find
you and me both,
these
man.
avenues. I'm sorry?
I said you and me both, man.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? It's been such a journey, and being able to experience gender in so many different ways, being on the receiving end of toxic masculinity and being on the receiving end of really healthy masculinity. Like, my dad is awesome, he has a really like balanced masculinity. Like I don't know what kind of husband he is, or what kind of boyfriend he might have been. But I know what kind of father he is. And the kind of manhood that he presents to me has always been something that I've really been impressed with. So now it's just like, I've experienced masculinity in so many different ways. So I'm here now trying to just figure it all out, and trying to figure out what the next step is, how to be better, how to be accountable, how to galvanize other men to be accountable and to want to be better. And to step out of these places where we're afraid, to be a little feminine, to be soft, to be afraid. You know what I'm saying? And to understand that that's, having a full range of emotion is about being a human being, and really just, embracing the human experience and the masculine experience at the same time. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, Tiq. I have one more inappropriate question for you.
Sure.
So I think that one of the things that that some people don't understand is the question of, okay, so if this is who you naturally are, if this is a you spoke of how there are different gender identities throughout history. We're in a binary two-gendered system right now, and that's where this trans identity arose within our particular cultural context. That's makes a lot of sense to me. The question, though, is if that's the case, then, and there have been all these different gender identities throughout time, and this is a cultural thing, then why the need for surgery? What's the point of, like, is this really natural if you need to go under the knife in order to make it so?
Yeah, well, I think, even non-transgender people, cisgender folks go under surgeries to create the kind of body that feels better for them, whether it's amplifying their femininity or amplifying their masculinity. So I think everybody's relationship to their bodies and its relationship to their masculinity and femininity is different. I think, it would be wrong for me to say that there's a social component there that influences people. You know what I'm saying? Let me tell you a story. A buddy of mine, right? He's the same age as me, 35. He's a trans guy. And he came out as trans when he was like 3. Right, to his parent. Okay, his parents are doctors, right? And his parents understood at the very beginning that that he is who he says he is, and they're like, we are going to raise him to be the person that he says he is. So this is our son Miles, and He's going to be our son. So he was raised, even though he was born, their daughter, when he was very little, he says, I'm a boy, I'm your son, right? So now he's a grown man. He's married to his wife, who's a transgender woman, right? It's great. He hasn't had any surgeries. And I can say this because he and I have had this conversation, so I can disclose. He hasn't had any surgeries, and he hasn't ever felt the need to have any surgeries. And so I'm like, trying to talk to him, like, what's that about? And he's just like, the way I was raised very protected and in this pocket, this enclave of family and friends and community. And, that was just never a thought that like entered his subconscious in a real way at a very young age. You know what I'm saying? So him having surgeries, for him to be the man that he is, to be the masculine person that he is, never even entered his mind. Because that's just how it was for him at the beginning. So I'm saying all that to say that like there's definitely a component there, and also, for trans folks, not everybody has surgeries. There are a lot of trans people who elect not to have surgeries because it's not a part of their transition. I've had surgery because it is for me. But oftentimes a lot of trans people don't.
In addition
I think there's more than not.
There's also the whole hormonal therapy.
Yeah, and there's a lot of trans people that don't do that either. You know what I'm saying? And that's what I'm saying. Like the spectrum of gender, like gender is, gender is vast. It really, really is. I know trans people who identify as trans, who are presenting a particular way, who aren't on hormones. Lots of folks. The transgender experience isn't a monolithic experience. I'm on hormones. I've had surgery. I've done all of these things. But a lot of trans people don't.
I guess it all comes down ultimately to this path of self-determination.
Exactly.
And it's funny because you essentially made the comparison to different forms of cosmetic surgery that people get, particularly might we say like boob jobs and liposuction and et cetera, et cetera. And I lived in LA for 7 years. It was all around me. But,
right.
The truth is, I actually in many ways, I had a more difficult time with that than I do with the concept of trans surgeries.
Right, but there are two different things. Because gender affirming surgeries are gender affirming surgeries, and they're not cosmetic. But here's the thing. I think the problem is, and this goes back to our thinking about patriarchy, is treating like femininity as something that is trivial. That's something that's, that doesn't have any value. That's something that is just cosmetic. I remember I used to date a girl who, she had really small breasts. She's a beautiful girl. She had small breasts. I didn't care. She cared. It affected how she felt about her as a woman. So she had a boob job. And she felt better about herself, and she felt better about her femininity. And I think that that's important, and I don't think it should be treated as something that's frivolous. And we often do that, and I think, and I think that there is a component where things are just out of control, when things, where it's obviously like a consumer product. But I also think there are places where there are women and feminine people who are having these types of surgeries because it's something that affirms them in their gender. And I think that's something that exists for cisgender people too. Like cisgender people.
I gotta say, I'm really challenged by this. I'm not saying you're wrong by any means, but it definitely challenges my value system. Because particularly when you make this connection between these two, I actually see the connection more through you explaining it this way than I did before, and it actually makes the whole concept more. I mean, ultimately, I do believe in self-determination, and at the same time, I guess I just think like. But you use the example of a woman with small breasts, and you described it as you don't care, but there's that still feeds the framework that bigger is better, more normal, more natural, the way it's supposed to be, and it's either there's some small breasts, it's either there's something wrong, or I guess it's okay, it's not a big deal, versus. What beautiful, gorgeous small breasts you have.
Exactly.
And I think that's just always been more of my tendency, more my desire is like, I personally, not that this is for me to determine, but I would far prefer to see this woman come to that place of true ownership and love for her body as it is, than for her to feel like she needs to, get cosmetic surgery in order to love her body.
Right. And I think as men, when that happens, this goes back to this accountability piece, is that, listen, 97% of the decisions that are made in media are made by men, right? And we can't discount what media does to how we value ourselves and what we think about our bodies and our sexuality, right? So if we having women who are feeling like, they aren't woman enough because they have small breasts, well, that's a part of the culture that we live in that is perpetuated by men that work in media, by men that are making these decisions. So if we want women to arrive at these places, then we need to start having conversations with other men, particularly men who are in positions, who are creating this media and are creating this culture, to stop. Right? We have to start undoing the things that we're doing, because it's these impossible, aesthetics and these impossible beauty standards that we're putting on women that are leading to these things happening, right? So the critique isn't with her, and that she's, oh, you need to love yourself, you need to do this. How can she when everything else is telling her something different, and everything else is something that that we are a part of as men? So I think that, that conversation has to be happening around men, around the culture that we're creating, around these impossible beauty standards for women, that this is happening. Because women are beautiful no matter, what her size is, what her body's doing, whatever. That's how I am. That's how I think, because I think that that's how you think,
I have loved and been attracted to a very wide spectrum of women.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it's great, but everybody doesn't think like that. But it's on us to start having these conversations and start thinking like, the culture that we are creating, and the standards that we are perpetuating is leading to a collective low self-esteem for women and feminine folks. You know what I'm saying? All over the world. So we have to have conversations about that.
Thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time with us today, Tiq. And honestly, there's still so much more we could dive into and explore. But how would our listeners find out more about you, explore your work, connect with you?
They can check me out at my website, tiqmilan.com, TIQMILAN.com. And also, my wife and I, we just did a TED Talk recently. So if you go to TED.com, our talk is on the main page. It's called Queering Love, a Queer Vision of Love. And we're talking about our marriage as queer and trans-identified folks. It's been pretty well received. So, check it out.
That's fantastic. Front page of TED.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So please do check him out. I mean, clearly this is a man living a self-determined life, and I think we all have things to learn from that. Thank you for your just sharing your wisdom with us all, and please join us again next week. This has been Destin with the Evolved Masculine, redefining sex, power, and success.